We're getting a few more details, Annie, on the shooter. Court records show that Santiago had some minor brushes with the law. This is coming from the Miami Herald. When he lived in Alaska, including a $1,000 fine for driving without insurance and another infraction for driving with broken taillights. An Anchorage landlord apparently evicted him last year for failure to pay rent. He was carrying some form of military ID. We don't know that if it was legitimate ID or exactly his ID. He is suspected of being a former U.S. Army soldier, though, from the New York metropolitan area. We're going to get a little bit more of that and what he might know. Senator Marco Rubio from Florida. Senator, thank you for taking the time. Have you learned anything, Senator?
Well, as has been happening often in these events, the information flow into the press is about as fast as what government officials know. You have multiple agencies now involved. The FBI at this time has no reason to believe it's an act of terrorism. Obviously, they haven't ruled anything out yet, and they're going to treat it as such until that's been ruled out. But basically, the information which I've asked and been confirmed that he was a passenger on an inbound flight. There are conflicting reports. One agency told me it was a domestic but not continental United States flight. Another agency, local agency, said it was a flight coming in from Canada, but irrespective, he was a passenger who flew in, went to baggage claim, and then at some point, loaded a weapon and came out and fired. And I think what they're trying to figure out now, obviously, is twofold. One is there anybody else involved? Is there anything else going on at the airport? Because there's always the fear that the one tactic is designed to draw in law enforcement, and then the other, a secondary attacker, could then target law enforcement and first responders. So they want to rule that out, and then of course try to figure out what was behind this. So that's, I think, going to be some time until it's more forthcoming. We understand all the facts about that.
What little we do know, Senator, and you know obviously this as well, is that he came out of the restroom once he got his gun again out of the case and armed it and then started shooting at this baggage terminal. The baggage terminal, as is the case in most airports, I guess that's the same here in Fort Lauderdale, is outside the security perimeter. Already we've heard calls for maybe baggage terminals should be within the security perimeter. Way too soon to jump to those type of conclusions, well, but what do you make of that?
Well, first of all, if you talk to law enforcement and the agencies I've spoken to, the bottom line is that he didn't have to get on an airplane and fly to Fort Lauderdale with a handgun in his bag to carry this out. He could have just driven up in a car, parked, walked in, and done the same thing, perhaps with an even deadlier result. So, again, the reason why we prevent handguns on aviation is to prevent hijacking or commandeering of the airplanes and the like. But at some point, no matter where you set the perimeter, there's going to be somewhere that's outside that perimeter, and there will be people there. So that's why this is not they're going to spend some time trying to figure this out, because it doesn't, you don't have to, if you wanted to shoot up the Fort Lauderdale terminal outside the perimeter, you didn't have to put it in a bag and fly all the way here. You could have just, driven up or what have you. So or you could have done it wherever he came from. So there's a lot here to figure out yet still, and I think it should take some time, and certainly people should reserve judgment and learn all the facts before we start proposing regulations and legislation.
Yeah, that is true. You bring up a good point, though, what his interests might have been in Florida. Do we know any of that? If he hails from Alaska or once lived in Alaska, there's very little we know about him. But do we know, or do you know, or have you heard of any Florida connections he has?
And I haven't up to this point. And one of the things about it is his name is not necessarily rare. Esteban is a very common name in Spanish, and his last name is not unique either. So I imagine there are multiple people. If you were just at a public search, it would take some time to narrow that down. Obviously, if they have his identification, he's on the passenger manifest, it'll be a lot quicker for law enforcement. But at this moment, that work is ongoing, and I want to be very cautious because I don't want to go any further than what they've gone in terms of making any sort of revelations. But I have not heard anything in the media that's inconsistent with what they've told me so far.